Graham would like to talk to you tonight about your new book, New Atheism, a Survival Guide. Could you explain what New Atheism is and if it's any different to atheism?
Okay, New Atheism really, it's started as a series of books that came out in the last decade. So you had Daniel Dennett's Breaking the Spell, you had Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, Sam Harris wrote a number of books, A Letter to a Christian Nation was in there, and then Christopher Hitchens as well. And the big granddaddy of those books is really The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. It came out after Breaking the Spell, but it's the one that really turned New Atheism into a publishing sensation. So really what you can identify in those books are three core themes. The first is that faith is irrational. Faith is by definition belief in the absence of evidence, or belief even in spite of the evidence. That's how they see faith. So faith is irrational. Secondly, you've got a strong commitment to science and scientific evidence. So they would see science as providing the answers that religion can't provide. And also religion should be rejected because there's no scientific evidence for it. The third feature of New Atheism was hostility to Christianity or religion in general, particularly what they would call the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Islam and Christianity. So you have hostility towards religion, and religion would tend to be treated as something that is inherently irrational and is explained away in terms of, well, maybe it's something that you've been raised with, or it's a mental virus. So you put those three things together, that gives you something that differs from most atheism. Most atheists would have been quite happy to say, well, we don't believe in God, but we don't believe you to be active against religion. The New Atheism is very hostile towards Christianity. On top of that, and I think one thing that most people have missed, is that the New Atheism doesn't stop with the books, and it doesn't stop with the celebrities. The New Atheism is going viral. It's going online, and you really can't understand New Atheism unless you're getting involved with the blogs, unless you're having a look at the forums, because there's a community which meets online and which engages online, and which, as I tried to show earlier on in the book, sees itself as a group of activists, and they're trying to promote New Atheism. They've taken Richard Dawkins' message seriously, or the message of other New Atheist authors quite seriously, and they want to do something about religion. They think that religion's influence in the West really does need to be challenged. And really in the book what I'm doing is I'm focusing more on the arguments that would come from online blogs, from websites that have been made popular, rather than just focusing on the books. So that's what's a little bit different about my book.
And as you said, New Atheism has become very popular over the last decade. Is there a reason why this has taken off so quickly? I
think there are three reasons. Two of them I think are cultural, and I think another one ties back to the church. The two that are cultural is, first of all, was 9/11. And the second one that I would call cultural is what I call a sort of a moral panic that took off in atheist circles, because religion didn't die in the academy. So if you go back to the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, when most of these new atheist authors were in university, and the myth at the time was that secularism would take over society, would have no need for God. As science progressed, as technology progressed, we'd see there was no need for religion. Religion would be moved out of politics, and religion would move out of the university. Well, what happened? Well, we had 9/11, and all of a sudden religion becomes one of the central problems for Western leaders. On top of Islamic fundamentalism replacing communism as the big bad guy for the West, you have George Bush Jr. in the White House, and the evangelicals have put him there. So religion all of a sudden becomes very important. That wasn't meant to happen. But the other thing that definitely was not meant to happen was something that Saints and Skeptics on the website, we call it the New Theism, or the New Christian Theism. Really from the 1960s onwards, and certainly time you get into the 70s and the 80s, you find that people are able to make very articulate and rigorous arguments for the rationality of Christian belief. And you find philosophers like Alvin Plantinga, Richard Swinburne, You find physicists looking at things like fine-tuning of cosmological constants. And in religious studies, whenever you start going into New Testament studies, we've gone from earlier in the 20th century, people were saying, oh, we can know very little about Jesus. By the end of the 20th century, there's this renewed confidence among scholars of all shades, not just Orthodox Christians, saying, no, the New Testament's got good historical information in there. And it just wasn't meant to go that way. For those who were going to universities in the 60s and 70s, this has not turned out the way they expected. And so there's this moral panic in atheism. What are we going to do? How are we? They can't shoot the arguments down. They're not going to be able to shoot the political importance of religion down. And so what you get is the new atheism. You get an attempt to try and influence popular culture through the books of the new atheism. The third thing that I think has generated the new atheism, and this is something the church needs to face up to, is a lot of very disillusioned young people in the church who have had questions, who have had problems, and who have come to the church and have wanted these problems addressed. I've got this question about, why should I trust the New Testament? Or I've got this question about, why can I believe in God? And no answers were given. Answers weren't provided. And I think the problem with that is while the people, quite often you would get the message, you just believe, or we don't have time for that, or or you trust the Holy Spirit. When people were given theological answers to these questions, what the young person they weren't hearing the sermon. What they were hearing was, we don't have time for you and your problem. And that creates a degree of disillusionment and a degree of hurt. And I think that you can pick that up sometimes on blogs and forums where what they have experienced in the church is something like the blind faith that Dawkins critiques. And so the internet has given them a forum where they can come together, and that does seem to be fueling it to some extent. I don't think it's the complete story, but it's certainly part of the story, in that there's a general frustration with evangelicalism, and some of it, to be honest, evangelicalism needs to hold its hand up to and say, we should have provided better answers earlier on.
So in this new atheism, we have a new movement of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
But why would anybody need a guide to help them survive new atheism? Okay,
so why a survival guide? The problem is earlier on in the book I talk about something which I call sneer pressure. And that is the strategy really, in particularly Dawkins' God Delusion, but some of these books, is really to look down at, to sneer at those who hold religious belief. And it's to ridicule and to mock. And the idea would be that, how can anybody who is seriously educated in a modern university believe this? And this seems to be the strategy. And what I want to do in the book is to try and point out to Christian young people, or to people who have questions about Christianity, students or those working with them, parents, listen, Christianity is a reasonable faith. It's always been preached as a reasonable faith. There are good answers to these questions. There's no need to be afraid of these sneers. Another reason I've written it as a survival guide is I want people to understand that these are questions that cannot be answered in a tweet. You have to do a bit of thinking. And another thing that I want people to be able to do is to understand the difference between a good and a bad explanation, a good and a bad argument. And a lot of the book is spent trying to sift out the difference between a good and a bad argument. So that there's just, hopefully anybody reading the book will begin to see what makes a good explanation, what makes a good argument. So for those reasons, for students who are in a generation where they think, well, you can sort out whether God exists or not by reading a few tweets from Richard Dawkins, the survival guide is there really to say, well, look, if you want your mind to survive in this sort of environment, you're going to have to do a bit of thinking, but it doesn't have to be particularly painful. It doesn't have to be onerous. And the book's a light introduction to these sorts of issues that tries to address Christianity and theism in a slightly deeper way.